Glory to you, O Lord.
On the following day, when they came from Bethany, he was hungry. Seeing in the distance a fig tree and leaf, he went to see whether perhaps he would find anything on it. And when he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season of figs. He said to it, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." And his disciples heard it. In the morning, as they passed by, they saw the fig tree withered away to its roots. Then Peter remembered and said to him, "Rabbi, look, the fig tree that you cursed has withered." Jesus answered them, "Have faith in God. Truly I tell you, if you say to this mountain, 'Be taken up and thrown into the sea,' and if you do not doubt in your heart, but believe that what you say will come to pass, it will be done for you. So I tell you, whatever you ask in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours." The Gospel of the Lord. Well, it's a great joy to be here with you all in chapel. Many of you might think, wow, Brian looks familiar. I see him around this building a lot. And that would be because Faith and Place recently relocated our headquarters to the 3rd floor in partnership with LSTC, which is just a great joy to be located here. I am a dad of twins, and while our staff team works remote all across Illinois, Wisconsin, and Indiana, I find it helpful to get out of the house during the day, and so I come here and I go to the very quiet 3rd floor, which is starting to get more activity and more hustle and bustle, which is a great joy as well as other professors come. But it's a deep relationship with LSTC that Faith and Place has had over the many years, and for some reason this just feels like a very special moment to be standing here with you all. A quick word about Faith and Place. We are located with staff that are working remotely from Southern Illinois, Central Illinois, Waukegan, Chicago, the suburbs, to now in Madison. We're looking to hire somebody out of Milwaukee, in Bloomington, Indiana, as well as Gary, Indiana. We believe in hiring staff from the communities where we serve. That's why we're spread out so deeply, and our amazing organizer staffs are working with the local faith communities, mosques, synagogues, temples, Lutheran churches, even some Mennonite churches like myself, a diverse group of people of faith building collective power to advance environmental and racial justice. We do that through our advocacy programs, but also do that by having direct programming in the community, helping overcome basement flooding, helping increase access to local food, healthy open space, helping reduce greenhouse gas emissions, helping to bring our youth into employment programs and environmental careers, and together building a network that's resilient and powerful, speaking of the moral obligation that we have to take care of our common home. Now I want to call out someone very special in the audience, someone that's here today, someone who just snuck into the back that I see over here, and that is Faith and Place's Outreach Director. The Reverend Veronica Johnson is here. Veronica, give everybody a big wave. Reverend Veronica Johnson has been working with Faith and Place for over a year now, leading our outreach efforts across the 3 states. But you all are so special at LSTC that she personally coaches your local green team, helping you do the good work here. So if you're on the green team at LSTC, I see a couple, raise your hand up high and proud if you're on the green team. Go green team. Yes. Faith and Place coaches through the leadership of Veronica and our green teams, over 253 active green teams at unique houses of worship or seminaries across the 3-state region. So that's people within these local faith communities that are dedicated to transforming their faith community to be the environmental and racial justice leader in their neighborhood. That's our vision. When you walk into any community, you ask a person on the street, who's leading the environmental and racial justice movement in this neighborhood? They point to the local seminary, they point to the local church, mosque, or a synagogue. This brings us to maybe a word about the broader context that led us eventually to Mark 11 today. As we were looking at the lectionary text, Aaron said to me, well, there's Mark 11 with the fig tree. That will be interesting. And I thought, yes, it will be. But some of the broader context, we just came off of Sunday, World Communion Sunday. Sunday that's an observance of a day taking place to promote ecumenical cooperation. A reminder that our solidarity as Christians is rooted in the ground that grows the grapes, and provides the bread that we all share together. Despite our difference in interpretation, we share the common land, the air that we breathe, and the water that we drink. And we're also today marking the end of what we know as the season of creation. The season of creation starting with the World Day of Prayer for Creation on September 1st, culminating in the Feast of St. Francis that I understand you all celebrated yesterday with the blessing of the animals. A theme this year of the season of creation of listening to the voices of those, our people and planet, who too often have been silenced, listening to the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. I was reminded this week that St. Francis, the outdoor preacher to the birds and the animals, the patron saint of ecology, that he actually grew up a wealthy son of a wealthy silk merchant. And in his young age, he was a lover of parties and fine clothes and fine dining and adventure. And while he tasted fully the life of wealth as a young man, it was encounters with the beggars and the visions of God given to him while he was a soldier that transformed him into the St. Francis we know today as the patron saint of ecology. I was so taken by remembering this quote of St. Francis that shortly after his conversion, he was asked if he would be marrying. And he said, "Of course, my wife will be of surpassing fairness. Her name is Lady Poverty." So it's in this theme of shifting our solidarity with the poor that captured my attention as I saw the Mark 11 text in today's lectionary. We find Jesus and his disciples in Mark 11 traveling to Jerusalem in the time of Passover. They, like other families, are traveling to Jerusalem for Passover, but we learn in verse 1 that they didn't take the main highway to Jerusalem, but they passed through Bethphage and Bethany first. Now we understand from commentaries in ancient texts that Bethphage and Bethany are poor communities, located outside the big, powerful center of Jerusalem. They're communities where the trash and the waste of the city is dumped, making the air harder to breathe and the asthma rates higher. They're what we call divested communities, where the sewer system isn't kept up and the streets are continually ignored, leaving back up in dirt. They are communities where the jobs and careers are kept away and the widows and the sick and the shut-in are kept out of sight from the power centers and the political machinations of the city of Jerusalem. The good news for the poor, though, however, during Passover, is that if you couldn't afford a lamb or a calf to sacrifice, you were allowed, as you came into the streets of Jerusalem, to find a pigeon. A pigeon where you could find anywhere for free. You could capture that pigeon, and this pigeon could be your perfect and acceptable sacrifice during Passover. But here's where it gets interesting. Jesus goes first to Bethphage and Bethany in verse 1, and in verse 11, he visits with his disciples to the temple to confirm what he's hearing from the folks in Bethphage and Bethany. You see, the Roman Empire at the time had in their imagination the remembrance of the Maccabean revolution of decades past, a revolution against them that started in the basement of the synagogue. And so the Roman Empire, being smart, had taken strategic steps to buy off the synagogue in Jerusalem. And they did this by making it so that you could only bring a synagogue, Roman-approved pigeon to sacrifice. So where would you get a synagogue, Roman-approved pigeon to sacrifice? Well, you'd have to go to the synagogue and purchase it. So not only did now the synagogue being bought off by the Roman Empire require you to have a synagogue-approved pigeon to be acceptable and perfect in sacrifice, but you had to buy that pigeon from the synagogue. In order to buy it, you had to exchange your Palestinian coins into Roman coins at a very high markup. This is what we know as the market exchangers in the courts of the Roman synagogue. And we know that this is the fact of what was happening in the synagogue in Jerusalem, bought off by Rome, because, and it's important for me to mention, let me be very crystal clear, numerous other Jewish movements of that day were also speaking out against the synagogue of Jerusalem. And so we find in verse 12, Jesus is upset. He's just gone to confirm for himself that this indeed is happening. High interest rates, instead of a free pigeon to sacrifice, you got to get an approved one. The synagogue and empire had become one and began to oppress the poor. And it is this time that he comes for our first encounter with the fig tree. Now, in order to understand, we must understand that the fig tree was highly symbolic in Israel in the day. It carried high esteem. It was regarded as the principal first fruits to be brought in the sanctuary of the temple. In rabbinic symbolism and imagery, the good fig is the godly man, or God's righteous. There's a connection in the Jewish mind between fruitfulness of the trees and the maintenance of the temple service. The fig represented security and peace and the production of good fruit. The fig represents healthy worship, worship that produces fruit to serve the community. So by looking at the fig and cursing it, Jesus is telling his disciples that the fruit of our worship only grows when we're in deep solidarity with the poor. I'll say it again because I think you missed it. Jesus is telling the disciples that the fruit of our worship only grows when we are in deep solidarity with the poor. When we forget that, our worship is empty. When we move to oppressing the poor, our worship is cursed. Jesus is upset. He goes back in solidarity with the poor of Bethphage and Bethany. And while we didn't read the scripture between the two texts, that is a scene of the famous protest that Jesus and his disciples form and perform in the synagogue, overturning the money changers and declaring that God's house is a house of prayer for all nations. God's house is a house where we live in solidarity with the poor. As we think of this theme for our context of our day, shifting our solidarity with the poor, I want to lift up a few ideas for consideration. Please notice that Jesus does not set out to destroy all fig trees. He simply, along with his Jewish colleagues, is pointing out that worship that produces fruit is indeed rooted in solidarity with the poor. His action takes directly that root cause. He so powerfully and directly takes on the Roman oppressive system of the day that ultimately he is killed for such speaking truth to power. Our social injustice and environmental movements of today must take an example and be willing to have the courageous willingness to speak directly truth to power. Now I'll tell you all, I've been doing this for a while, and I've been in a lot of environmental circles. And we lose ourselves when we nitpick each other, when we lift up the shame and the guilt of this individual action and that individual action. Our actions must be rooted in solidarity with each other and with the poor and powerfully expressed against the raging system that has our backs up against the wall. I'm here to tell you, having done a little fundraising in my life and understanding a little bit of politics, that the fossil fuel companies of today fund directly efforts to focus environmental concern on individual action. The fossil fuel companies are winning when you're more worried about the straws that you are using than about the 100 companies in the U.S. who are responsible for 80% of global greenhouse gas emissions. We're talking about 100 companies responsible for 80% of our global greenhouse gas emissions, and I can't tell you how often I'm in a bitter debate about the straws that I'm using. At Faith and Place, we are continually asking, how is our work in solidarity with those who are most impacted by environment and climate injustice? The other dynamic that we have to be truthful about is so many of our environmental groups and our social justice organizations and nonprofits, we are spending our time talking to each other. Reverend Veronica can testify of the number of meetings and team meetings and meetings after meetings where we talk about this thing and that thing, and it is divorced from deep-rooted togetherness in community. We must be looking at our structures and understanding whether we're a church, a seminary, or an environmental activist organization. How are we building our relationships with each other to a deeper level, to a level where those that are most impacted by air pollution, those impacted by basement flooding, those most impacted by lack of access to healthy and local food, those most impacted by lack of access to full-time careers and employment, those who do not have access to health care no more because of the oppressive system, those who are LGBTQIA and are marginalized on the corners of our systems and our societies. How do we continue to grow in deeper solidarity with each of them? The writing is on the wall. Every effort that we do today is faithful. Every effort that we do today is right. Every effort that we do today is helpful. But the writing is on the wall that as we look at the future, we're looking at new realities that we haven't faced before. And as we're located here in the Midwest, in a city where climate migration will continue to come to us, as we're located in a state that is welcome to all for the healthcare needs that they need, as we're located in a state that is taking gun violence seriously and welcome of LGBTQ others seriously, as we're located in a state where organizations and seminaries are going to continue to work together to build resiliency and health, how do we continue to welcome those who come our way? How do we make sure that our focus of our seminary classes and our church programming is deeply rooted in solidarity with the poor? How do we stop ourselves when it's not and throw over the table and find something new? Because if we don't, the fruit will wither and the tree will die. We must be rooted in solidarity with the poor. We must continue to work together.